At what point does trust become the most dangerous thing you can give someone? How many warning signs can exist in plain sight before they stop looking like warnings at all? Some tragedies don't explode into existence. They form quietly, built from routine, from familiarity, from believing you're safe because nothing bad has happened yet. One ordinary decision, one familiar place, one moment that didn't feel important at the time. Then the silence begins. Not the kind that lasts minutes, but the kind that stretches into hours and then into fear. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, the truth has already begun to bury itself. This story isn't about panic. It's about what happens before panic ever starts. And once you hear it, you'll never look at normal the same way again. Before fear entered the picture, life was still moving the way it always had. There was nothing dramatic about this part of the story. No urgency, no tension that anyone could point to, just routines. The kind of routines that make days blur together. Work, family, responsibilities that don't pause just because life feels heavy. Ashly was living inside those routines. She was someone people depended on, someone whose presence was expected, someone whose absence would later feel impossible to explain. But at the time, there was no reason to worry. She had plans. She had obligations. She had people who expected to hear from her, see her, count on her. And that's the part that matters, because disappearances don't start when someone goes missing. They start when someone stops being watched closely, not out of neglect, but out of trust. Ashly wasn't someone people checked on constantly, not because she wasn't loved, but because she was reliable. She showed up. She followed through. She handled things on her own. And when someone lives like that, their silence doesn't immediately feel dangerous. It feels temporary. At this point in the story, everything still felt normal. The day unfolded the way days usually do. Nothing stood out enough to be remembered later. No one paused to take mental notes. No one sensed that this was a moment that would need to be replayed again and again. And why would they? There were no raised voices, no frantic messages, no signs that something irreversible was quietly taking shape. Just movement through familiar spaces. Just conversations that didn't feel important enough to hold on to. This is where many true crime stories lose people's attention, because nothing happens here. But this is exactly where the story begins. Because when everything feels normal, instinct goes quiet. Trust fills the space where caution should be, and decisions are made without fear attached to them. Ashly was navigating her life the way millions of people do every day, balancing responsibility, relationships, and the emotional weight that comes with trying to move forward. There was a past behind her. There were things she had already lived through. But from the outside, it looked like progress. And progress has a way of convincing people that danger is behind them. At this stage, no one was counting minutes. No one was checking locations. No one was bracing for bad news. Because absence hadn't happened yet. Silence still meant busy. Unanswered calls still meant later. Time still felt flexible. And that's what makes this chapter so unsettling. Because nothing here feels like the beginning of a tragedy. It feels like the middle of a life moving forward. A life that hadn't given anyone a reason to panic. Yet, this chapter isn't about what went wrong. It's about what felt right. The calm before anything felt off. The trust before it was questioned. The ordinary moments that didn't ask to be remembered, because once those moments pass, they become the only place left to look for answers. And when the silence finally changed its meaning, this was the last time anyone could say they weren't worried. By the time fear finally arrives in a story like this, it has usually been waiting for a while. Not loudly, not obviously, just close enough to feel familiar. Ashly's life did not exist in isolation. Like most people, her present was shaped by a past that didn't disappear just because time moved forward. There were relationships behind her, conversations that had already happened, decisions that felt finished, or at least finished enough. From the outside, it looked like progress, like someone moving on, like distance had been created. But distance doesn't always mean separation, and moving forward doesn't always mean being free. This is where the story begins to change its shape, because long before silence became suspicious, there were emotional threads still quietly connected. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just familiarity. The kind of familiarity that lowers your guard. The kind that convinces you there's no danger because nothing bad has happened yet. Ashly wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless. She was human. And humans tend to underestimate what feels known. At this point, there was no reason to believe that the past posed a threat. No reason to imagine that history could reach forward and touch the present. And that's what makes this part of the story so uncomfortable. Because the warning signs, if they existed at all, didn't look like warnings. They looked like conversations, like unresolved emotions, like loose ends that didn't feel sharp enough to cut. There was no countdown, no moment where everything suddenly felt wrong. Just small, ordinary interactions that didn't demand attention. And when danger doesn't demand attention, it's usually ignored. Ashly was navigating something many people recognize, trying to live forward while still managing echoes of what came before. Trying to be strong, trying to keep life steady, trying not to turn every situation into a crisis. Because when you've survived things already, you start believing you can handle whatever comes next. At this stage, there were no raised alarms, no urgent warnings from friends, no reason for anyone to step in. Everything still existed within the boundaries of normal. And normal has a way of hiding risk. This chapter isn't about blame. It's about context. Because what happened later didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of familiarity that felt manageable until it wasn't. And that's the danger of the past when it's allowed to stay close. It doesn't announce itself as a threat. It waits to be trusted. As this story moves forward, it becomes clear that what mattered most wasn't a single moment, but the emotional landscape leading up to it. The assumptions, the comfort, the belief that some doors, once closed, stay closed. By the end of this chapter, nothing has happened yet. No one is missing. No one is searching. But the ground beneath the story has shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly. And once that shift happens, everything that follows begins to move faster than anyone expects. If you asked anyone involved in this story what made that day different, they wouldn't have an answer, because it didn't feel different at all. There was no sense of finality, no moment that stood out as important, no internal alarm saying, "Pay attention to this." It began like so many other days before it. Ashly moved through her routine with the kind of familiarity that comes from repetition. The kind that allows your mind to wander while your body does what it's done 100 times already. Plans were made without hesitation. Time was measured loosely. There was no rush. This is the part of the story that's hardest to sit with, because nothing is wrong yet. Every action still exists inside the comfort of later. Later messages, later check-ins, later conversations. Nothing feels urgent enough to interrupt the day. Ashly wasn't hiding. She wasn't running. She wasn't afraid. She was simply moving through her life. And that's what makes this chapter unbearable in hindsight. Because this was the last time everything still made sense. The last time silence still meant busy. The last time unanswered messages didn't feel heavy. The last time absence didn't raise questions. If you freeze the story here, there is no crime, no mystery, no fear, just a woman handling her responsibilities the way she always had. And yet, this is the moment the entire case pivots around, because from this point forward, time behaves differently. Minutes that once slipped by unnoticed will later be examined, replayed, and questioned. Small decisions, where to go, who to see, how long to stay, will be treated like turning points. But at the time, they were just decisions. Nothing about this day demanded attention. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no lingering glances, no sense that this routine would never repeat itself. And that's what makes the concept of last so cruel. Because the last normal day never announces itself. It only becomes visible after everything changes. Later, people will ask the same questions again and again. Was there something missed? A detail overlooked? A moment that should have felt wrong but didn't? But on that day, there was nothing to investigate. Only motion. Only time moving forward the way it always had. This chapter doesn't end with panic. It ends with continuity. Life still in motion. Trust still intact. Silence still harmless. And that's the final moment, before the story crosses a line it can never come back from. At first, nothing felt wrong. Time passed the way it always did. Minutes slipped into hours, and silence still felt harmless. Unanswered messages didn't raise alarms. Missed calls didn't feel urgent. There were explanations for everything. Busy, occupied, later. This is how concern enters quietly, not as panic, not as fear, but as a pause. Someone checks their phone again, then longer than before. Still, no one rushes to conclusions, because rushing feels unnecessary, because worry feels premature. Ashly had disappeared from view before, in small, ordinary ways. Life demanded attention. Responsibilities pulled her in different directions. So silence, at first, felt temporary. But time has a way of changing meaning. As the hours stretched on, the silence stopped feeling neutral. Messages remained unread. Calls went unanswered, and the space where her voice should have been began to feel heavier. This is the moment everything slows down. Because people begin retracing steps, not physically, but mentally. When was the last time you heard from her? What did she say? Did anything feel off? Questions surface quietly, as if afraid of what they might uncover. Concern deepens not because of what's known, but because of what isn't. There is no explanation that settles the unease, no response that restores balance, just waiting. And waiting becomes unbearable. At this stage, no one knows they're standing at the edge of a mystery. They still believe answers will arrive on their own. A returned call, a message that explains everything, a reason that makes sense. But the silence holds, and when silence holds long enough, it stops being absence, it becomes presence, something that sits in the room, something that can't be ignored. This is when fear begins to form, not loudly, but deliberately. Not everyone feels it at the same time. Some resist it, some deny it, because admitting fear means admitting the possibility that something has gone terribly wrong. And once that door opens, it can't be closed again. By the end of this chapter, nothing has been confirmed. No conclusions have been drawn. No truths have been uncovered. But the story has crossed a line. Silence no longer feels normal. Waiting no longer feels safe. And from this moment forward, every unanswered question will demand an answer. There is a moment in every disappearance when waiting stops feeling hopeful and starts feeling irresponsible. That moment doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds quietly. It arrives when explanations no longer settle the unease, when patience starts to feel like denial, when silence stretches longer than it ever has before. Someone finally says it out loud. Something is wrong. At first, searching looks small. Phone calls to friends, messages sent again, just in case. Routes retraced in the mind. Maybe she went here. Maybe she stopped there. Maybe she just lost track of time. But hope weakens with every unanswered call. Concern organizes itself into action. People stop asking if something is wrong and start asking where she could be. Timelines are rebuilt from memory. Every detail becomes important. What time did she leave? Who did she plan to see? What was she wearing? What did she say that day? Questions pile up faster than answers. Places she was expected to be are checked first. Then places she had been before. Then places that don't make sense at all. And everywhere the result is the same. Nothing. No sign of struggle. No sign of escape. No indication that she chose to disappear. Just absence. And absence has a way of growing heavier the longer it's ignored. Search efforts expand as the realization settles in that this is no longer a delay. This is a disappearance. Law enforcement becomes involved. Formal reports replace casual concern. Hope is forced to share space with fear. But the most devastating truth remains unchanged. There is still no body. Without it, grief has nowhere to land. Without it, the story refuses to settle into certainty. Families exist in a suspended state, not allowed to mourn, not allowed to hope freely, just waiting inside unanswered questions. Searching becomes relentless because stopping feels unbearable. Every empty location feels personal. Every dead end feels like failure. And with each passing day, the fear grows quieter but heavier, because it begins to feel less like she is lost and more like something has taken her. This chapter doesn't end with discovery. It ends with exhaustion, with the understanding that searching may not bring answers quickly or at all, and with the realization that some stories don't resist resolution. They erase it. As the search continued, attention shifted from where she might be to what she left behind. Details that once felt ordinary were suddenly treated with urgency. Phones, timelines, movements reconstructed minute by minute. Technology remembered what people couldn't. Patterns began to form. Gaps became visible, but clarity never arrived. What surfaced raised concern without offering resolution, enough to suggest that silence was not accidental, not enough to explain what truly happened. And still, the most important piece was missing. There was no body. Without it, every answer felt incomplete. Every discovery led to another question. Every step forward stopped just short of certainty. By now, hope and fear existed side by side, because whatever the truth was, it wasn't simple, and it wasn't finished. As the search continued, attention shifted from where she might be to what she left behind. Details that once felt ordinary were suddenly treated with urgency. Phones, timelines, movements reconstructed minute by minute. Technology remembered what people couldn't. Patterns began to form. Gaps became visible. But clarity never arrived. What surfaced raised concern without offering resolution, enough to suggest that silence was not accidental. Not enough to explain what truly happened. And still, the most important piece was missing. There was no body. Without it, every answer felt incomplete. Every discovery led to another question. Every step forward stopped just short of certainty. By now, hope and fear existed side by side, because whatever the truth was, it wasn't simple, and it wasn't finished. By the time the evidence surfaced, it was clear that this was no longer a question of waiting. Something had happened. But without a body, the truth remained incomplete. And that is the cruel reality of cases like this. When there is no physical ending, grief has nowhere to rest. Hope has no clear direction, and answers never arrive all at once. Ashly Elkins does not exist in this story as a mystery alone. She exists as a life that mattered, as a presence that left a space too large to ignore. A daughter, a mother, a woman whose absence became louder than any explanation. Cases involving missing Black women often unfold quietly, not because they are less tragic, but because they are too often given less attention. And when attention fades, so does urgency. This story reminds us of something uncomfortable, that danger doesn't always look dramatic, that silence doesn't always arrive suddenly, and that sometimes, by the time fear finds its voice, it's already too late. Ashly's story may not have the closure people want, but it deserves remembrance, because even without a body, a life can still leave a shadow, and some truths, no matter how deeply buried, refuse to disappear. If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Remember her name. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told with care, clarity, and respect, consider subscribing, because awareness is sometimes the only justice left.